So, first of all, thank you very much for coming. Ryan, it's a huge pleasure to have it here. I can smell the, the excitement of everyone here. So yeah, thank you very much.
Cool. Yeah, no problem. Happy to be here.
I'm going to introduce you. So Ryan Smith is senior level designer right now. He works at Massive as a Ubisoft studio, and he works in the following games: Call of Duty, Black Ops 2, Call of Duty Advanced Warfare, Call of Duty Ghost, Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, and The Division 2. So it's right, Ryan?
Yeah.
Okay, yes, Ryan has also experience mentoring level designer, and now he has a brand new project called Design Them that we are going to talk during this interview. So again, thank you very much for coming, and let's start the interview. So I'm going to start with the first question. I'm super excited.
Okay.
So tell us a bit about your background, basically your studies or any special type of studies that you have undertaken, or one that you would recommend for any game level designer profile.
Yeah. Well, so I got into the industry by making custom maps for Call of Duty back in the day. I got interested in level design when I was younger, when I was playing StarCraft. StarCraft is one of my favorite games. But I was only 8 or 9 at the time, and so I didn't really make anything that was really that great. And so it wasn't until Call of Duty 2 came out that I started to really want to dive into level design. And they had modding tools that they would release, the older Call of Duty, so you could just get the level editor and start making maps and upload them to servers and play with your friends or play with your clan. And so that's how I got into it, because the clan that I was in, they wanted someone to learn how to make maps. So I said, I'll do it. And so the first few maps I made were really bad, and like always, and that's how I learned how I learned about level design, was because I would make these really bad maps, and then I would put them on the server, and everybody would play with me, and they would tell me all the bad things about it. And they would say, this sucks, you should do this instead, or there's not enough cover, or, it's not balanced, all that kind of stuff. So that's how I learned, was just from hearing people essentially just give me feedback all the time. And then I would go back and I would change things. And every map that I made was a little bit better. And I was going to school for music business and audio recording technology. So it was going to be more of like a sound designer, not even related to video games, just kind of working in studios with bands and stuff. And I just kind of did level design on the side. And then when I was a senior in college, a recruiter from Activision, from Sledgehammer Games, got in touch with me because they saw my website and a couple of the maps that I had uploaded. And they asked me about if I wanted to talk with the team. And I was so excited. And, I was still in school at the time. It was in my final year. And so I responded, and I said, like, yeah, I'll leave school early, like let's do the interview, all that kind of stuff. And they were like, okay, hold on, like, just why don't you wait until you graduate, keep working on your portfolio, and apply when you graduate in the spring. And so I did that, and then I ended up getting an internship with Treyarch on Black Ops 2, and that's how I got into it. So I never took any sort of studies or mentorships or anything. I just kind of worked just out of passion and just tried to learn as much as I could on my own. Because back then, we had like modding community websites, like modsonline.com or COD Utility, that was one for Call of Duty specific. And so you would just read forum posts and learn from talking to people on the forum and learn how to use the editor. And so it was a really kind of old school kind of way to get involved. So I never did take any actual studies, which was weird, because when I started working in the industry, a lot of people that I knew had gone to school for it. And I felt a little kind of out of the loop with some other aspects of game development, because I was so focused on just making maps and level design, that people would start talking about art or like the tech behind the art. And I'd be like, what's a shader? What are you talking about? Like, I have no idea. Like, what, Maya? I don't know. And so I had to do a little bit of catching up when I first started, because I was with people that were either really experienced, that had been working in games for a long time, or had just come out of school where they kind of, they had a lot of knowledge under their belt. So yeah.
So you will do something different right now, because you are saying, like, there is people that came from the university, and if you step back in time, you undertake any,
like, would I go to school? I don't know, because I feel like this is an interesting one, because I mean, back then there wasn't many schools that taught game development, and school for me, I find school to be very boring. And like, when I went to school for audio recording, I started to hate audio recording because I was going to school for it. Like, my passion kind of got drained out of me from going to school for it. And so by the end of going to school for audio recording, I kind of didn't want to work in audio recording anymore. And so I'm happy that I didn't go to school for game development, because I don't know, maybe if I went to school for it, I wouldn't be here right now. But I mean, that's, you could always say that what if situation. I think that if I could go back in time, I would try to invest more in learning other facets of game development and not just level design, or at least try to find information about other disciplines, so that I was a little bit more well-rounded when I got into the studio. I would say that.
Yeah, understand. So how is a week of work for a senior level designer at Massive, or when you are a level designer, or you were level designer in Activision? How is the work loop, basically? Any methodologies, frameworks that you are following, tools?
Yeah, well, it definitely depends on what part of the process we're in the project. Early on in the project, when we're doing pre-production, there's a lot of documentation and a lot of research for the levels, working with the artists to gather a lot of reference images and try to nail down like the tone and the visuals. And of course, taking the direction from the directors and kind of running into that, all the goals that they've set up and down the same path, so that everybody's happy. We have a lot of like mission design documentation that we do. So there's a lot of checkpoints where we do a lot of work and we put some documentation together, and then we have to get it approved by the leads and by the directors. And then there's rounds of feedback that come out of that, so that we get to meet what it is that their vision is, and then also throw our own creativity into that, of course, along the way. And then once all that stuff is approved, then we move into block out. And then we kind of stay in block out land for a while, and then the artist comes in. But so it depends, when we're doing a lot of documentation, my week is nothing in the editor and more of just researching and putting together pitch presentations, level flow documentation. I don't like to personally do, I don't like flow charts, and I don't like intensity graphs and those types of things. So I'm the kind of person that I would rather do like a beat by beat document where I explain through text what's going to happen in the mission, and then I try to prototype any mechanics along the way. And then when we get into production, then I'm just every day working all week on the level, trying to iterate on it, make it better, get feedback from other people, schedule play tests with the other designers to get their feedback. And I'm usually chasing narrative and art to make sure that they're doing what they need to do, or they're doing what I need them to do. And then, on top of that, they have things that they want to do and things they need to do from their direction as well. So it's just a constant feedback loop and constant, a good feedback loop. I mean, in a good way. But it's just a constant iteration.
Yeah,
production.
iterative process. I mean, it's a lot of alignments, right?
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I know, right, that you have to be aligned with a lot of departments and to push forward the level that you are. Yeah. So one question regarding this specific topic, Ryan, is like, you are now senior level designer, and you have been, you started as an intern for Activision, for Call of Duty. So do you see that this role right now involves more management?
Slightly, because usually when you become a senior, you're given more responsibility. Sometimes not, it depends on where you are. Sometimes it just means that you're expected to deliver better quality work, and there's no added really responsibility. But sometimes, like for me on the Division 2, I was asked by my lead to kind of be the point person for side missions in the game. So I had this added responsibility where it wasn't just my work that I was worried about, but I was also trying to organize and facilitate about 8 or 9 other designers on their side missions. So it's kind of like a pseudo lead role where you're the go-to person. You're the go-to designer for all things related to side missions. So if narrative team or the art team wanted to talk about side missions in a meeting, they would ask me to go to that meeting, and I would talk to them about it. And I would meet with the directors a lot to hear what they had to say about the side missions, and then we would discuss what our goals were and what we were going to try to do, and then that would flow down to the team. So it's kind of like a lead kind of role. But that happens a lot when you become a senior, I think, and most of the time at a lot of studios. You're kind of given a little bit more responsibility in that sense to kind of take something and run with it and be the kind of the person that holds the torch, and the vision holder for certain features.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You also are involved in any tool aspect, like any methodology or frameworks to define any tool for for crafting the levels.
Like, you mean specifically like in terms of tools, like what features and everything?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, anybody, even juniors, if you have an idea for the editor, whatever that might be, there's usually a process, like a request process, that at most studios you can go through. So I wouldn't say that that's added with seniority. But maybe when you have senior, your ideas are more appreciated by other people, which sometimes isn't the best. But yeah.
It's a very flat organization, right?
Yeah. And I think that, seniors too, I mean, even not seniors, but, anybody who has an idea, like if they watch a GDC video or they come up with maybe a different method or process that the team should be using, or that they think the team should be using, it's usually very open that anybody can pitch ideas and kind of schedule a meeting in a room and get everybody in there and say, hey, listen, I made this presentation. I think that instead of, in our blockout process, maybe we should be doing this kind of thing, or paying attention to this instead of that. And all that stuff is usually pretty welcomed, I would say, at most of the studios that I've been at.
Yeah. Cool. So about Massive, for anyone that don't know Massive, that I don't think so, is the studio behind The Division. So can you tell us about what games are you making right now, if you can, or about the project that you are currently working on?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're working on the Avatar game for the James Cameron movies. Okay. So I can say that, I think, yeah. But anything more than that, I don't think I can talk about.
Yeah, okay. Are you excited about the project?
Yeah, it's going good. It should be fun.
Okay, so you go from The Division to this project, so I think it's quite cool. Yeah. So, okay, I'm going to talk about as you know, Brian was a mentor for other level designer, and he was running a mentorship program. I think you stopped doing this the previous month. I was pretty surprised to talk about to drive a project that I'm going to talk after. But about the mentorships, Ryan, where the idea came from? How did you start?
So Josh Lynch is a material artist who's pretty well known in the games industry, and I worked with him at Infinity Ward on Call of Duty, and we got along pretty well when we worked together. And then he worked at Red Storm, which is a Ubisoft studio, and they work on The Division with Massive. So I was at Massive years after working with him at Infinity Ward, and then he was at Red Storm, and he came out to Sweden to do like a talk for the artists on materials. So we got a chance to kind of catch up and hang out. And then it was a couple of months later, he got in touch with me and he said, hey, I'm starting this thing. It's called the Mentor Coalition. And he said, it's all artists and everything, but I want to do, like, would you be interested in kind of doing level design mentorships? And I was like, yeah. At first I was pretty nervous because it was a month before my wife was due to have our first baby. And so, like, any added sort of stress or responsibility or just kind of, another hobby was like difficult because it was like, oh man, I'm about to have a baby, like, or my wife's about to have a baby, like this is going to be crazy. But yeah, I really want to do it. And he explained to me, it shouldn't be too stressful. Like, here's what it is. And he laid it out for me and talked to me about how it's, an hour and a half call once a week for the whole month, where you kind of give direction, and you don't have to worry about, it's not a class. You don't have to worry about like creating and preparing a lot of material for people and assignments and grading and stuff. So that made me feel a lot better. But that's how it kind of came up. And then I had been wanting to do something for a while, because there's a lot of level designers out there in the public who do a lot of big things and have communities or write books and all this kind of stuff. And I felt like 10 years in the industry now, I could probably do something like that. And I really care about level design, so I knew that I wanted to do something, but I didn't really know what. And I had a bunch of ideas floating around. So when he asked me about it, I was like, yeah, absolutely, I'll do this. This is a good step in that right direction. And then now it's been about 2 years since then, and I started about 8 months ago. I started getting the idea for the design den and started slowly working on it in my spare time, and realized that's really what I wanted to do, and that was going to be my way into that kind of area of being more outward in the social space with level design, and trying to help designers grow. Yeah, so that's how it happened.
And any learning, Ryan, that you get from those mentorships?
Is there any what?
Any learning?
Any learning? Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, there's a saying that says, what is it? It's like, the best way to learn is to teach, because when you try to explain something to somebody, you start to realize what you really know about that thing, and sometimes there's a lot of hidden pieces there that maybe you didn't really weren't sure of or really didn't know before. And then so through the practice of explaining and teaching things, you kind of improve your own work by doing that, because then you start to kind of practice what you preach. You start to realize in your own work, oh well, this isn't really what I'm supposed to be doing right now. Maybe I should take a step back and take my own advice that I give people. So yeah, I learned a lot about level design, and level designers, I think, always continue to grow. Game developers in general, I would say. But I also learned, so one of the big things that made me want to do the design den is because during their mentorships, I learned that a lot of designers have they're not focusing on the right things, and there's a lot of aspects of level design that people should focus more on, and there's ones that people should focus less on. And I think that there's, like, for example, like out there in the public Twitter and everything, there's a lot of things being pushed around, like leading lines and whatever, focal points and landmarks and all this kind of more, all of that is level design and art related. But I just see a lot of that, and not a lot of, hey, why don't you just make a fun level and play it and show people and talk about it and talk about the mechanics and talk about how it plays. So there's a lot of leaning into a lot of visuals that I've seen out there. And so with the design den, I kind of want to push more for teach people that it's about an experience level design, and it's not always about the way it looks. And while those things are important, it's really about the experience. And a lot of times I would play someone's level that was a mentor or a mentee, and they would have really great documentation and they could talk about it, and it sounded like, this is the same thing at work when we see people that apply. It's like their documentation is really awesome, and it sounds like, oh man, this level is going to be awesome. It looks like they've got everything figured out. And then I would play it, or I'd watch a video of it, and I'm just super bummed, because I'm just like, oh man, it seems like they spent a lot of time working out the details and making documentation, and they have a good imagination, but the execution of it isn't really that strong. So that was where kind of where I got the idea that with the design den, I was going to do more example stuff, and I was going to have the YouTube channel, and I was going to try to get devs into the Discord so that they could really talk to people and discuss with them the real processes that we use in AAA, and try to steer people away from a lot of the basic stuff that you see out there on Twitter.
Cool. I just copy paste the design then invite into the class.
Okay, cool.
So yes, basically it was actually my next question, right, about this project, right? That how did you start and where the idea came from? So if you want to add anything to this, or we can go into the next question, that basically is how do you picture, right, this project in the 4 years. So
Yeah, no, I think that was a pretty good explanation of
Yeah.
why it started. Yeah.
And how did you see the project in 2 years, Ryan?
I don't know. It's interesting because what I originally thought was going to happen was that the Discord would be a slow build. We would have like some core people that would join, and it would be more of a slow burn. And I thought that the focus was going to be more on like the YouTube channel, and then I would have to worry and concern myself more with getting videos out there, like tutorials and whatever. And then as soon as it launched, it became more of like a self-run community. Like I don't even really have to message or talk to anybody in there, and it just kind of like runs itself. And I try to respond as much as I can, but there's so many people talking that it's like essentially what happened is the Discord became the focus for me, and then the Notion page, because everyone wants to have a place where all the resources are. So I had to shift what I focused on to more about the community instead of like myself and the YouTube channel and getting tutorials and stuff out there. So that surprised me, but I think in the next couple of years, I'm going to try to just do like everything that I wanted, everything that I kind of put out there and promised people. Like it'll be the Discord that'll continue. There'll be challenges. Like I'm working on trying to get a challenge set up now for people. Blocktober's around the corner. Maybe we'll have a challenge for that. Hint, hint. And then of course the YouTube. Like I have videos that are in progress. A couple of them I'm looking at hopefully getting 2 of them up there because I haven't actually released any of the videos yet. Just a channel intro. So by Monday I'm planning to have like the first couple of videos uploaded for this devlog. And then I want to have tutorials, and I want to have building example spaces and all this stuff. So, it's really just a matter of, I think 3 years is enough time to do all of that stuff and just kind of continue it. And hopefully there's like a big library of content in that time is I guess what I'm hoping for. Yeah. And I think, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I will probably, at some point, maybe in the next year, once things kind of slow down and balance out with it, right now it's kind of a lot. But once it slows down, I probably will be starting to do mentorships again, through the Design Den. Like I'll start my own program through that. So that's probably a good chunk of stuff to do in 3 years.
Okay, cool. So take notes, guys. Ryan is going to start the mentorship, but yeah, I had the pleasure to be with you during one of your mentorship and was pretty amazing, to be honest. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go for a different topic. What are your 3 favorite games of all time, and why do you like them? There is any design decision to point it out?
I think the first one would be Zelda Ocarina of Time. Was my favorite N64 game. It's definitely up there on the list. I had played other RPG style games. Zelda's very light when it comes to like, RPGs, gameplay, but it was the first one that really kind of gripped me and made me want to keep playing. And I think the story in Ocarina of Time is one of my favorite stories. And I don't know, it was just kind of the setting and how you can kind of just go anywhere, and there was kind of a linear kind of path, but you could steer from that, and there's a lot of side missions and a lot of side content that you can complete that would keep you busy for a really long time. And it just felt like I was on a journey when I would play that game, like especially because they have that time jump where you're the kid Link and then you kind of turn into the adult Link. I remember being, I don't know, I was young at the time, 10 or something, and just being super amazed by that and just really feeling like I was on this journey. Like even though it skips time, I still felt like I was that character and that I was in the Temple of Time, and that now I'm awake and now and like the world has changed, and seeing like the world become different over that 7 years and how it kind of changed because Ganondorf took over and it was like super dark. That was just, I think it was just awesome, and so that always sticks out to me as one of my favorite games. Then it would probably be StarCraft, like I mentioned earlier. It's a very competitive game, and there's not many games that I'm not a competitive person when it comes to gaming. I usually just like to kind of take it easy and relax and play pretty easygoing multiplayer games if it's going to be multiplayer. But StarCraft, for some reason, it was like I needed to play 1v1 matches, and I needed to beat everybody, and I needed to try to get better. And I was looking up strategies, and I was looking up, all sorts of ways to get the upper hand when playing. And So yeah, that one quickly became one of my favorite games, and it was always that game that even 10 years later, I always had the disc lying around, or I always wanted to play it at some point, and I would always be reinstalling it, every couple of years or a year or so, and just playing a bunch of games of StarCraft. So I think that was one of my favorites. And then I guess it would be Call of Duty 2, probably a lot because of nostalgia purposes. It was the game that got me into the industry. It was the game that made me want to make maps. I had a lot of good memories playing that game. I think that design-wise, I think it was definitely the first. Like, I had played Medal of Honor before that, the World War II ones, and Call of Duty 2 was the first game, the single-player game that made me like, oh wow, this is how single player should be. Like, this is what a really awesome story is, and the gameplay of not really, it doesn't really hold your hand, that game. Like, if you go back and play Call of Duty 2, it would be considered, I guess, a linear first-person shooter, but it's not just a giant hallway. And I think they do a lot of interesting level design work with the maps, the way that things flow and kind of circle around, and they reuse a lot of space, which is a very difficult thing to do, in terms of level design, especially for a AAA game. So yeah, I think that one, and the multiplayer was amazing in Call of Duty 2. All of those maps, there's a lot of classic maps. You got Carrington, Tojane, Matmata, like, oh man. And I used to play a lot of competitive kind of 3v3 matches with my clan. And anyway, yeah, a lot of good memories with that game. So those would be the three favorites.
There is any specific level design map in Call of Duty 2 that you remember, with very nostalgic?
In number 2, in Call of Duty 2? Yeah, probably Carrington. When I think of Call of Duty 2, I think of Carrington. It was, it's this French town. There was a battle in World War II, and I think it was also because, originally there's a story. Call of Duty was originally supposed to be, very early on, it was supposed to be a Band of Brothers video game. That's like what it was actually going to be. And they were in talks with HBO to make it a Band of Brothers video game. And then I think it must have been extremely early on when it fell through. But there are still some maps like Carrington. If you watch Band of Brothers, I think that's, I want to say it's episode like 3 or 4. It's called the Battle of Carrington, I think. And it's literally the same, like, you'll see the same buildings and the same, like, decals on the wall and everything, or like the posters and everything, and so it's like essentially like the same layout, part of it anyway, from the Band of Brothers. And there's also Brecourt, so there was a couple of maps, and there was even some of the voice actors from Band of Brothers that were voice actors in the original Call of Duty game. But anyway, yeah, that one always sticks out to me because it's like the quintessential Call of Duty map to me, at least when it comes to the World War II era.
Cool, thank you very much for the response. I think Zelda was for now the winner, because we are voting here in the Classic channel, so we have a lot of Zelda lovers. So, do you have any tips or an advice for those here that want to push a career in game or level design? There is anything that you wish to have known before starting to work in level design?
Let me see. I would say if you're a level designer, it's always more impressive when we look at people's portfolios if they know how to script their missions, and that they script the missions well. So make sure that you know the tools well enough that if you're going for more of like a single player style, that you can create like wow moments and kind of big set pieces. I think one thing that somebody told me later on that I wish I had known earlier was that you don't always have to have these giant projects where you're like, I'm gonna make a big Uncharted mission level, and you spend all this time documentation and you start blocking it out and you get the block out done, because you're gonna burn yourself out, and you have to think of that those levels take like a year plus more. And there's usually dozens of people working on them. Even if there's one designer, sometimes there's 2, sometimes there's 3, sometimes it gets bounced around. Block out is one designer, then first playable or detail phase is somebody else. So you really have to kind of make sure that you don't burn yourself out, because it will happen. And so what I would suggest is focus on creating smaller pieces of content and scope it down, and really quality over quantity. I would, as somebody who looks at people's portfolios a lot, I would be more impressed if I saw somebody have like a video or playable maps where it's more of an experience that's only about like 2 or 3 minutes long, where it's just like a really fleshed out, quality made 3-minute playable demo kind of a level, where maybe there's like a mechanic, an interesting mechanic, and there's like a mood and like a tone, you know, like it has feeling to it. And not all of those things have to be in the same example. So you could essentially on your portfolio have like a video or a playable demo that's 3 minutes, that's the focus is tone and establishing some sort of mood in a level. So you could literally just have like, I don't know, let's think of an example. Like, okay, well, Daniel, you made, can I mention what kind of level you made during the mentorship? Is that okay? So you had like a cyberpunk thing. So I'm thinking of that. So like if you wanted to make like a cool cyberpunk mood piece, you could just have like a demo that just fades up and there's just a player walking down like a really gross, dingy cyberpunk alleyway where there's like steam coming out, and all of a sudden somebody runs out from a door and there's an objective and you have to chase them or something. And it's like a 3-minute chase where you're just running over stuff, running down alleyways, jumping on rooftops, and it could be like 3 minutes. Now that's a lot of work to do something that well, to make it really kind of make somebody feel something when they're watching it. But I think that it's still probably a lot better. It would be a lot more worth it. It's like bang for buck than it would be to try to say to yourself and have this giant goal of creating an entire level, like an entire single player kind of level. If you just focus on those 3 minutes and you really nail it, I think that's a little bit better. So yeah, a long way around to say scope down your projects and make sure that they're quality projects.
Very valuable.
And then I think if you're a game designer, you know, the same thing. I think that having fleshed out mechanics is probably the way to go. You don't always have to try to design like the best use cases for them. I think that having a lot of prototypes and a lot of documentation, I guess if you're a game designer, is probably the way to go. But I'm not a game designer, so I'm not really, I would say that I'm a game designer, but not in the sense that a lot of studios are going at now, where it's a lot different from level design. So I may not be the best person to ask as far as like what would a game designer in the more modern role of a game designer do to get the job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So when you interview any level design candidate, what kind of skills you seek for your team, or to hire him and bring him to your team?
Communication is big. We really like it when we interview people, it needs to feel natural, like we're having a conversation at a bar or at the studio. So that's probably the biggest one, because we've turned down people that have, and this is at every studio that I've been at, people have always gotten turned down, even if they're really talented, if when we're talking to them, we really just don't feel like, you know, we would have a good time working together, or that the communication is really there, or their attitude seems off, or, you know, maybe they wouldn't really be, I don't know, just it's hard to say, but I think that communication is really key. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed. So which soft skill do you find the most interesting for level game designers? You said, you know, like communication, but any other?
I mean, people who are, I like people when they are very goal-oriented and focused and scheduled, which is difficult to see in an interview, I guess. But I would say, yeah, being like a scheduled and I don't know, focused individual. Is that even really a soft skill?
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that a lot of times, and this goes back to what I was saying, like usually a lot of the interview, what you have to think of when you're applying to places is that it's really about your portfolio. Like, it's about the work that you have above anything. Like, all, communication, obviously, like I said, yes, but make sure that you deliver really awesome work. And I think that there's sometimes, especially when it comes to level design, and I mentioned this a few times, there's a lot of like heavy focus on documentation and trying to impress with documentation and how polished it looks and imagery. But at the end of the day, that doesn't really matter compared to how fun your level is. And when we look at a level or when we play a level, you can really get a sense of somebody's design sensibilities. So when you're working on something, make sure that you get a lot of feedback from people and make sure that you apply a lot of the knowledge that you've gained, because that's going to matter way more than anything else that you have, any of the documentation or anything on the design test. Like, it's all about that end level that people play. So, yeah.
Indeed. Yeah, playing the level is very important. So, do you have any openings right now at Massive in your studio? Any internship program for the students?
We don't have any design related openings right now, from what I have seen. But we always there is an open application on the website. So anybody is always more than welcome to apply. And I think that it's a standard thing that usually if somebody is impressive and would make a good fit for the job and for the studio, for the team, then usually they get contacted and something can be worked out.
Cool. Any internship, or do you have in the past any internships?
Yeah, they usually do internships every year. I don't know if it's different this year because of the COVID situation. If there are internships on the website, I don't think any of them are design related, but I think that we do internships at least, every year. But again, I don't really know what the current status of that stuff is. So, yeah. And we usually do have level design internships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I will say to all the students that stay tuned for the following years. Yeah. Maybe, I don't know, maybe any of them come work with you. It will be maybe an absolutely pleasure. Yeah. Oh yeah, I think the interview questions we already finished, but we have a lot of questions
I see that, yeah.
That you can see in Preguntas de Clase channel. I'm going to read it and try to put together the questions that are very similar. So I'm going to let's see how it goes. Okay. And let's see if we can answer the many as we can. So the first one is, how does the mentoring session works? Does the session require advanced knowledge on design? And there is another question that is very, very similar from Johan that said, and in the bottom that said that what kind of knowledge and skill are supposed to learn during the mentorship? Can you explain a little bit how many hours, the structure of the sessions, basically all of that regarding the...
Well, so when I was doing the mentorships with the Mentor Coalition, which I'm not anymore, the sessions were 4 calls per month at an hour and a half long each. We would jump on Discord, and usually it would start with either the mentee would have a project that they were already working on. Sometimes it was a school project or a personal project, and I would usually get a head start and see their project before the first call and give them a lot of feedback. I would write up like a huge 4 to 5 page document of feedback with screenshots and suggestions for them, and usually people were pretty happy with that. And then from there, usually the first call would be us reviewing that and then talking about what the person wanted as a goal for the end of the mentorship. That way it kind of gave me an idea of the things to kind of focus on and harp on throughout the 4 weeks. And then usually the second call would be them showing me that they implemented a lot of the feedback from the first call on their level, or, hey, like I didn't like this piece of feedback, and it's like, okay, cool, whatever, that's fine. So it kind of like continued like that. And then at the fourth, by the end of the sessions, my hope was that we completed all of the things that they wanted as a goal for the entire mentorship. Whether that was like, oh, I think that my my design sensibilities are really off when it comes to not designing really cookie cutter cover spaces or combat spaces with cover layouts, or everything that I make seems to play the same way, or how do I cater to different play styles? Let's focus on that. So I would try to make sure that we got all of that stuff done by the end of the month, and usually people were pretty satisfied. The sessions do require pre-knowledge of level design, but I wouldn't say that it required advanced knowledge of level design. I had people that were students, I had people that were not even in school, that were just doing it as a hobby, and I had people who were already working in AAA. So it was really, there was no limit to the knowledge. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I have here one question that I think is pretty interesting, that it said, from the looks of your portfolio, you then direct work on the multiplayer Call of Duty maps, but maybe you could still answer this question, that Call of Duty maps are designed to be played in variety of game modes. What is the biggest challenge of designing a combat map that adheres to a variety of game modes simultaneously?
Yeah, so I never worked on multiplayer when I worked at the studio, but when I was in the modding community, and what got me the job was making multiplayer maps. So I was still pretty familiar with the way it works when it comes to multiplayer maps in Call of Duty. And one of the maps, the single player maps that I made was turned into a multiplayer map. So a lot of my buildings and some of the layout is in one of the multiplayer maps, but I wasn't the person that did it. But anyway, yes, they are. What are you calling it? Yes, they are usually designed to play in a variety of game modes, but some maps, like with Modern Warfare, there are some maps that only work with certain game modes. So I think that it's kind of going back to, because it's always best when you focus a map on specific game modes, so that you really make sure that the layout works for those, and that its strength lies within playing for that game mode. But there is a lot of crossover, like with Domination game mode and, like, I think Search and Destroy and Capture the Flag, they kind of work well together. But it's always easier to kind of focus on them. And then, so for a while, every map, I think, in most of the Call of Duty games during the era, at least when I was working there, were always designed for both, which is definitely more difficult. But I think now with Modern Warfare, there are maps that are very specific to game mode, so it seems like they're kind of going back on that, which I think is a good thing. I think the biggest challenge is just, making sure that everything plays well, because, there's different design requirements for each. Like, what would be like a good example? Like Domination works really well when you have like a standard 3-lane map, but when you're doing something like, I guess, Search and Destroy probably wouldn't be a good match for Domination. But if you were to make it like a Domination map, maybe that's not the best way to go, and you need to make sure that the bomb sites are in nice and big open areas that are away from the spawn positions. But where those positions are might not be the best spot to have like the A flag in Domination. So there's kind of like, you're just worrying about a lot of things and trying to shove a lot of things into one map. So yeah, it can get super difficult. Yeah.
Yes, there is another related question. I think to this one is slightly different, but I think it's related. It's say like Call of Duty games have similar core mechanics and loops, but even with that, every campaign feels different and unique. Would you say that this is only for the narrative quests and the environment, or the level design have something to do with it?
Yeah, I think level design has something to do with it. When I was there, every studio that worked on COD, they have their own design direction. It's not always, there's not like this giant Call of Duty Bible of design direction that every studio follows with anything. So we always would look at it like as if we were just making a different game entirely from whatever other Call of Duty was out there. And of course, yes, there are some core things that are pretty staple to the series that we would do because we had to, but at the end of the day, it was really up to us as the developers to make it as similar or as different as we wanted to. And when it came to level design, sure, like we had different, like on Black Ops 2, there was a lot of missions where there was a lot of like multi-path, kind of like different experience stuff going on. Like even in one of the missions that I worked on, the Panama mission, was during development, it was like, okay, this one, we're gonna have like this huge environment and let the player choose which way they want to go. And along the way, they're gonna experience some small different stuff. It wasn't like huge, there wasn't like huge giant moments, but you'd be running down the street and there'd be like an enemy that would like jump out of a door and like flop over a car and then start shooting at a civilian or run down an alleyway but if you had gone down this other path, there was like a small explosion or something, or you'd see someone beating somebody or whatever. And usually in those games, there was more or less kind of like a linear path that you would kind of like a golden path that you would go down, and there wasn't really a lot of other options for the player. So there was a lot of experimental kind of level design stuff at that time on that game. And then every time a new game would come out when we were in development of the next one, we would always sit down and kind of analyze their level design and be like, okay, well, what are they doing different? And like, is that what we want to do? Or like, how are we going to take it? How are we going to take that further or do something else? Or what was good or what was bad about that? So we never really seemed like we were doing the same thing over and over. So I would say that yes, the level design had something to do with how the campaigns felt different. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So in another completely different topic, there is another question that I think is pretty interesting because you came from the United States. So he's pointing out that if you saw any difference between the game industry in United States and Europe.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's definitely a lot. The one thing I would say is that it's weird to say because being American, when you live somewhere, you don't really realize how the people are. Like you would expect everybody to be that same way, I guess, for some reason. And so like when I came to Europe and started working in Sweden, I realized that Americans obviously are very different from Swedish people. And in America, people are more in a working environment or working in games. It's very much like you work really hard and you try to push for whatever it is that you want to do. And you stay late more often and you work overtime more often. And if you have an idea, you get people together and you start talking about it. And it's not uncommon to like put together a presentation or put together like some sort of pitch and then just try to like get people to get on board with it. And most of the time you'd already maybe have a prototype or something. But in Sweden, and maybe this is just a specific thing to Sweden and not Europe, but there's a little bit more of like, take a step back, kind of relax and there needs to be checks along the way at every step. You can't just kind of like go off and do your own thing and turn around and say, hey guys, look at this thing that I made. But in the States, that's a little bit more common. So I would say it's a lot more of a relaxed and working environment. And there's not as much of like this angsty push to kind of do what you want or kind of like push things forward, which has its good and bad. It has its disadvantages and advantages, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Obviously, yeah. This is completely different. So we have another question here that said, what was your reaction when you see that there was another video game similar to Call of Duty called Critical Ops?
I've never heard of Critical Ops in my life, so I have no idea.
So we can keep carrying. So I see that you have collaborated a lot with leads, directors, scripters, artists. I imagine it's different situation for each, or maybe not. How did you collaborate with this teammate? What's a specific workflow that you follow to work together on different tasks? What was your procedure to communicate with other teammates and combine your work for iteration?
Yeah, it's definitely different depending on who you're talking to and who you're working with. Most of the time, when you're working on a level, like a single player level, you're usually put into a team with, like everybody is one team, like so that you're the level designer on the team, there's an artist on the team, there's an animator on the team, there's a scripter, whatever. And so everybody's kind of working together on the team, like it's not like there are some studios where, yeah, like you'll have to talk to somebody on the other side of the building and they have no idea and they have a lot of other tasks and they're kind of out of the loop with something. But most of the time with single player content, you're usually put together with those people in the same room and everybody's super well informed with what's going on. A lot of times there's morning syncs, so like every morning at the same time at like 9 a.m. everybody stands up in a big circle and you just talk about like what'd you do yesterday, what's your plan for this week, and what are you doing today, and just kind of catch everybody up with what's going on. That way it gives a chance for everybody to kind of know like, okay, they said that they need this thing from me, I should probably get that thing to them today. Or, oh hey, is that thing working for you that I submitted yesterday? Oh, let's talk about it after the meeting. So yeah, like it's definitely a different situation for each. When you're talking to leads and directors, it's more about like you have to usually those meetings are more about like you're showing something. It's like catch up. It's like, hey, here's what we did, and they usually give you a lot of feedback and you're taking a lot of notes. Where when you're talking to an artist or a scripter, it's like you're the teammate on the team, so it's more of a collaborative discussion. Yeah.
Cool. How restrictive or specific were the specification of for each level, if any? Did you have a lot of creative freedom to make them, or did you have to follow any guidelines from someone else?
It's definitely both. Depends. It always depends. Everything always depends on the project and on the team and on the game. There's never like an end-all way of doing this. But working on Call of Duty, we had a lot of creative freedom. Early on in the game development, it was pretty common that we would get to the designers would kind of pitch ideas, and you could pitch a mechanic, you could pitch a whole level, you could pitch like pitch like 3 levels that are connected, like an overarching narrative. You can kind of just pitch whatever you want. And usually those meetings would be like in a theater, and the directors would sit there. We would all sit there and hang out and go through the pitches, and everybody would present them. And that was really great because that allowed the team, I think that really made us feel like we had a lot of creative control, because what would happen is a couple months would go by, or like weeks would go by, and the directors would come back and say, okay, cool, we have like a new story idea, or we have like we've organized everything that you guys pitched, and this is what we've come up with. And they'll pitch us like the big story idea, and you would see like, oh, well, that's my idea. It's not in the same location, but it's it's there. Or like, hey, that location that I pitched, that one is there. Like they actually put in there that we're gonna have a level at that location that I pitched. That's cool. So there was a lot early on. There was a lot of the base, like the structure of the game usually came from a lot of the designers. And then of course throughout that would continue working on the levels. There wasn't a lot of hand holding when it came to building anything. But of course there's always time when things have to change or get scoped, or a narrative moment would have to be shoved into a mission that wasn't there before, and you'd have to work around it, sure. But I would say that at least working on Call of Duty, I felt like the designers had a lot of creative freedom. Yeah. On the Division, it's very different because it's an open world game. So we had to stick to the locations that we've chosen. But again, like the designers had a lot of freedom in picking the locations where we wanted to have missions, where we wanted to have side missions, and we worked a lot with the narrative team on like what the scenarios would be and what the narrative would be for those missions. And a lot of times, some of those ideas came right from the designer. Some of the times it came right from narrative. So it went back and forth for sure. Yeah.
Cool. Interesting. There is another question that I saw on LinkedIn that you have a degree on business management and audio recording. Where you learn game design, do you recommend some online courses? I think we talked about this topic during the interview. You did it with the Call of Duty 2, right? Crafting of your own maps. If you want to say anything else about this question, or we can carry on?
No, I think we can carry on.
Okay. So this is the one that I was waiting for. You just said that the prologue for the Division 2 is the least favorite level that you made it. Why is that?
I think because it was towards the end of the development of the game that we had to make that level, and we initially had a little bit more time to work on it, and so we came up with a bigger the idea was a lot more elaborate than what you see in the final version. Which is usually, that's always the case, but this was like, it was a very different level when we first initially started working on it. And it was going to be I thought it was going to be really great. And it's still fine, but there was just like a different direction that we were going with it. And it was going to be bigger on a much bigger scale and have a little bit more set pieces. We were essentially, it was funny because they when I was working on it, one of the directors was like, we can finally, like, you can make a Call of Duty level in the Division. I was like, yeah, okay, this will be fun, this will be awesome. But it's, the game isn't really, that's not really what the game is, but okay. But it was like, it's a single player level, you can't play that mission with other people. So if we were going to be able to do some of that stuff, this is where we could do it. And then, time was running out and resources were thin, because, there was a lot of sessions set up for voiceover and for like animation work that would go past the deadline that we had to do. And since a lot of that stuff was unique because we were trying to make it really unique, we weren't really going to be able to hit that deadline. So we just had to kind of scope it down. And I'm happy with it. It's fine, but it's just, it's a small level. It's like, you just walk forward and you have some combat with some people in a pretty simple setup, because I literally had like, I think 2 weeks to block it out, or not even, maybe 1 week. And the artist had like 2 or 3 days to art it. So it came in really hot. And I think that compared to the other things that I did in that game, I think that it wasn't as, wasn't my favorite, but yeah, that's why.
Okay, cool. There's another question that I think maybe it's a little bit long. Yeah, yes, here is. Can you say what level have you had to iterate more? How many times? Just for the lads. Why do you think was it?
That's funny. No, I think in Call of Duty Infinite Warfare, there was a moon mission that I made, and that one I had to iterate on a bunch, because it was originally supposed to be like a moon base, like a military base on the moon. And so we started making that, and then it was also supposed to be like there was like a giant war happening at the same time. So we were building spaces in that direction, and I was building like this giant. We had like we didn't know if we were going to do 0G or like low gravity. So there was like this tech that was in the narrative that was like what was it called? I'm sorry for cursing. Like gravity towers or something like that. And so I had to like design a space where you were like in this gravity field, and there was like trenches that you were jumping over, and you would have like low gravity. And then we ended up cutting that idea, so I had to strip it, and then we turned it into a big like an airport on the moon. And the airport was like this giant curved structure, and that was really cool. And so then I started working on that, and then we just iterated on that like so many times, like it was like, here's the first version, and then it was like, no, it's not good enough, or like we need to hit harder. Where's the roof? It needs to be like a curved roof. And then it was like, okay, I have to delete all this and then do it again. And then there was a whole intro section that we had that I originally built, or no, we had this intro section where you're supposed to like jump in. We're like landing on the outside of the airport, and you were gonna like low G, like really slowly, kind of like walking on the moon into the airport. And then it was like really boring, so we got feedback that it was boring. And then so I came up with this idea that was like, what if you drop on the outside, like further away from the airport, because there's a big battle going on, and we would be dropping out of an aircraft on like a vehicle, like a drivable vehicle, and you would have control of the vehicle, and you would be able to drive over craters and like go drive near, like around the side of like these giant opening, like these giant craters. And like I did a prototype for it, and it was cool. And then there was like an on-rail MG part where you were like shooting up at the sky, like with ships and everything, and it was just way too long, so we had to cut that. And then we kind of combined it with that other idea, and you were just way closer to the building. You dropped it on a vehicle, but you didn't have control, so it was just kind of like a cinematic, and then you got right into the moon port, into the airport. So yeah, anyway, that was like we made it over so many times. It was crazy. Yeah.
I think in the equal, just to point it out, I think in the equal way that like deadlines are our worst enemy, I think the feedback about is fun or is boring sometimes is very challenging, right? When they say this is, and it's like, okay, what specifically you want to see, or you want to give me that, because fun is, you can understand fun or boredom in a lot of ways. So.
Yeah. And most of the time when I've been on something that like that mission that had gone through so many changes, at the time I just remember being so stressed and bummed out and being like, oh, why are they making me change it again? Like, it's fine. And looking back on it, it's like, it wasn't fine. It was bad. They were right about how it was. And what ended up coming out was what we could do with the time given to us, like with what we had. Because it's tough making games. Like, of course, I would have preferred to have like a drivable sequence so the player had control and was involved in this giant battle, but that would have taken months and months and months. And what we ended up shipping still took months and months and months, So it's like,
cool.
Yeah.
So what are the main difference or challenge that you encounter when you went from making first-person level like once in Call of Duty to third-person level that in Division? And I'm going to link with another question that is, what is the most difficult design challenge that you have faced?
Okay. Yeah, those are pretty similar questions and very good questions. I think that the main difference was that when I when I first started working on the Division, I was making this level, and I didn't have, like, because coming off of Call of Duty, it's a first person game and you can move very fast, and tight spaces work better than they do in a third person game like the Division. And so I remember the first level that I made. I thought it was fun. Like, I put it together and I was like, oh, this is a really cool layout. And then I played it and I still thought it was fine. And then I let other designers play it and they were like, no, it just doesn't work for third person. I was like, well, what are you talking about? And they pointed all these things out to me and I was like, yeah, I guess they're right. Like, there was a lot of like tight spaces, and there was like it was like this big combat space where we had containers stacked up on top of each other. And I was just doing a lot of things where I had like really small flank routes that would kind of jut off to the side and then like come back around. And I was using the metrics, but I wasn't really adhering to them like 100%. Like, they give you, like, let's say you have like a minimal width for a path that's like 3 meters or something, and that's like in the Division. And then I was doing that, but I was like doing it too much, so it just was really annoying. And you have to think about like where the camera clips into and like where the player turns, and it's just very different because with Call of Duty it's just so fast to come around a corner and just flick the controller or flick your mouse and you're right there and there's a piece of cover. But with the Division, you need to have more space for players to kind of understand and see the space and be able to kind of observe things. You can't just like throw them into situations like that because it doesn't work, and you have to like rely on the cover mechanic for people to get into cover. And so yeah, that was probably that, and that was also probably the biggest like design challenge, that thing that I faced. Which just brings up like another interesting topic, which is when you design missions or when you work on a game, you really have to kind of shift your design sensibilities for that game and for that engine, based on what you can do in the engine from a tech standpoint, and then how the game plays. You have to design for that game. Yeah,
metrics are everything, to be honest.
For
all the students here, metrics are something very important.
Yeah. Stick to them.
So we have here one question that is, maybe you already say this and I didn't understand you correctly. This is Alexia's. If that's the case, he apologized himself, but he told me, he said that you mentioned that doing 2-3 minute short demo levels for our portfolio is the best way to go. On those levels, would you recommend us to polish the levels to the full extent, art, music, lighting, documentation, or not?
So hold on, did you say for the suggestion of making smaller maps?
Yes, I think so.
What was it? Would it also include doing like polishing the other aspects of it? Is that what it was? Oh wait, hold on, let me see. I can see it right here.
Yeah, it's at the bottom.
Yeah, so I think that, of course, it depends on like your skill level or what your focus is. But if you can art something and you can light something, if it's a small project like that, yes, I would say try to push it as far as you can. And then even if there is no art or lighting or anything, that's also fine, because if your focus is level design or game design, then that's what matters most. But with that being said, it's very impressive when you're looking at somebody's work and they finish it and they're finishers, because it means that they are passionate, and it means that they know how to do something from A to Z. Even though if you're a level designer, you're not gonna be doing any lighting and you might not be doing any art or sound, obviously, it still shows that your drive is there, and it sticks out and impresses way more than somebody who just shows block out all the time. But showing block out all the time is also not a bad thing. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's like, yes, it's like take it as far as you can, but that also means that the quality has to be high. Like if you just throw it, if you're not really good at arting, then don't try it. Just focus more on what you're good at. That's like a big thing too. Focus on what you're good at, because that's what you want to shine. That's what you want to show people that, and show companies that you're good at. You want to show them what your strengths are, right? So focus on what you're good at. Don't try to art something just because you think you should, because it's a small piece. Just focus on what you're good at. And the documentation, I would say, yes, absolutely, always the documentation, because if you're working on a level or a mechanic or something and you have that small demo, this is something I recommend to people, is that like it's good to still tell people what that bigger level would be. You know, even if you're only showing me like one moment or 3 to 4 minutes of gameplay that would be in like an Uncharted level, have a paragraph that shows like what that world is like. Do some world building. Tell me what's going on in this situation too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So there is another question that I think is interesting, and this is the last one that it's very linked to your career. It said sound can be quite an important aspect of a level design. Do you think that your sound-related studies help you in your level design career?
My sound design studies?
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, there are times when I talk to sound designers about something at work, but I mean, very minimal, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I think that when I did my design test, I would record my own VO and everything, and I think maybe it sounded better than other people's audio that they had in their demos. But I don't think that maybe, I wouldn't hope that made a big difference in whether or not I would get hired or not. But yeah.
Yeah, Aleix is pointing out the same student that made you the previous question about the small levels, that he said that sometimes they are told not to put pretty things on the portfolio. Do you think blockout levels fall into that category?
I think it can, yes. I think there are ways to make blockout look really good.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that maybe the word pretty, when you say put pretty things on portfolio, that initially you think of visuals like art, but that could also mean that your blockout is blockout. Maybe the mechanic that you're showing is really polished, you know? So I guess it's subjective to say that, to only put pretty things on your portfolio. I think the better way to say it is only put quality work on your portfolio, because that's a little bit more of a broader understanding of, I think, that's kind of like, yes, of course, we're supposed to put good things on our portfolio. I wouldn't necessarily say that pretty is no, I wouldn't say that.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, blockout falls into that category, to answer the question more directly.
Cool, thanks, Ryan.
Yeah.
Look, Joan has a very nice phrase here that he said, when my Kung Fu master give me the black belt, said, Joan, now you have to teach people Kung Fu, and remember, to teach is to learn from second time. Just remember, Ryan explained, to teach is to learn again. I think Joan is here at the interview. Can you mute Joan, please?
Yes, I am. Do you hear me?
Say something.
Yeah, I just remember this history like 20 years ago when he said me this thing, and I remember it almost every year when I am teaching game design and level design to my students, and almost every year I learn new things, and almost every session. So it's really a really nice sentence, a really important sentence for me.
Yeah.
When I heard that you say something similar, I remember my old years when I am learning Kung Fu,
Yeah, it's true. It's true, man. Yeah.
It's really true. So I don't know, Daniel, if you are finishing the interview. I have a final words.
Yes. I think we went through all the questions, and yes, thank you very much, Ryan. Ryan is our 10th interviewed. So please, Ryan, when we finish Joan finish to say the last words, go to Mesa 1 and I will farewell you. So
okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being here. It's been an absolute pleasure. Remember that I want to say you that remember that almost 90% of the people here on this server are game and level design students, and we are almost 300 people right now. So I think that the most important thing on this kind of interviews, and in this one specifically, is that it's to give you So thank you to give a little bit more of clarity to these guys, because
Yeah.
sometimes, this industry is a little, where we work lacks a little bit on clarity. And I
Yeah.
think that all the interviews that we are driving, conducting, and this one specifically are giving clarity to these students, and they don't know exactly what is going to happen when they finally get his title and his
Right.
degree, So
Yeah.
thank you very much for this. You are a very accessible person. You are very clear on your explanations, and I am pretty sure that a lot of people will hear this interview on the podcast and take a lot of profit.
Cool.
So, just to finish, remember that you are invited to stay on the server. Every Monday we give classes of game and level design, and you are invited to give one of these classes if you want.
Cool.
At this time, if you want to come one of these days and start talking of whatever you want, we will be very, very welcome. Every Wednesday, we try to invite level designers and game designers from all the studios all over the world. So if you know someone that you think will be interesting to interview, please give us his contact,
Yeah.
and you can be our partner or ambassador, because we are not really known, but you are. So it will be super interesting if you can do something like that. And finally, every Friday, a bunch of students, and this is probably the most interesting thing here on this server, make some presentations of their works, and analyze levels of many games. We have a lot of presentations analyzing, trying to evaluate the good things, the bad things, and finally making improvement proposals of a lot of games and levels. This is a really interesting part of the dynamics of this server, And for sure, you are also invited to come to these presentations and give a little bit of feedback to them. They will be super thankful to you if you can give them a couple of advices or tips. So
Awesome.
Thank you very much for all. I think Microsoft, please, and I think it's at the time of a great applause.